Hi there. My name is Rebecca Scout Sanders, and I was the run-of-the-mill skeptic, pessimist, and depressive personality I killed at parties until I studied positive psychology. Now I host Positively Ridiculous podcast, where we discuss the positive impacts of everyday people, places, and practices that bring happiness, inspire hope, and build flourishing communities in the most unassuming ways. We look at these subjects through the lens of positive psychology and how its science and application can and is improving our lives while riding shotgun with a self-admitted skeptic. So buckle up, Buttercup, and come take a ride on the positive side. Hello. Welcome to the second season of Positively Ridiculous podcast. I am your host, Scout Sanders, accompanied by my now 30-pound mini Bernedoodle, Dagny Joy. It's fabulous to be back. I've missed making episodes and talking with you groupies for good. It's been too long, almost 3 months. But don't you worry, baby. Mama's back, and she's more positive and ridiculous than before, with an exciting season planned with guests, games, songs, and of course, science. If this is your first time with us here at PRP, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, heck yeah, doing something right, and happy to have you along for the ride as we campaign for the ridiculous. And if you are a new listener, you may be asking yourself, should I let my emergency contact know where I am right now? Or what does she mean by campaign for the ridiculous? Great. I love people who ask questions, and no, don't call your emergency contact yet. Here at Positively Ridiculous podcast, we shine a light on the people, places, and practices that are making positive impacts in industry, politics, healthcare, education, law enforcement, sports, and your and my everyday life, all with the science of positive psychology. I do think that good sense and good science can transcend political divides, dogma, and rhetoric, making way for respectful discourse and creative problem solving for some of life's biggest challenges. So no, I am not promoting happyology or extreme optimism or asking you to replace your belief system with only science, because I'm certainly not. I am asking you to come along with me, a self-admitted skeptic, to hear what science has to say about kindness, generosity, love, respect, friendship, dignity, grit, and meeting hard challenges head-on, unapologetically. Positive psychology can help us do that through hope, hard work, and a willingness to look and really see what matters to each of us. Because when we do that, we see the same things matter to all of us. Finding meaning, mattering, feeling like we belong, contributing at work, loving and being loved, providing and protecting our families, pleasure, and dare I say, happiness. Sounds ridiculous, right? I thought so too. Welcome to Positively Ridiculous podcast. Buckle up, Buttercup. Do people expect you to be late when invited to a social event? Are you always sliding into meetings 10 to 15 minutes after they start? What about your doctor's appointments or PTA meetings? Maybe you found yourself walking into a room to get something only to stop in your tracks because you blanked on what you actually entered the room to get. Do restaurant menus send chills of horror down your spine because there are so many options, making it impossible for you to decide, so you just say, I'll have what they're having? If you answered yes to any of the questions, well, then you've experienced executive dysfunction. Holy crap, what is that? Well, before we discuss what executive dysfunction is, let's first unpack what executive functions are. Executive functions are a set of mental skills that we use every day to manage our lives. They're controlled by the brain's frontal lobe and prefrontal cortex, so think forehead area. And these areas are responsible for planning and organization, emotional and behavioral control, your working memory, personality, problem solving, attention, social skills, and flexible thinking, and then also your conscious movement. If one has issues with focus, following directions, and emotional regulation, they can be described as having executive dysfunction. Causes of EFD, or executive dysfunction, they can be stress, exhaustion, depression, alcohol, who hasn't experienced that, autism, dementia, ADHD, and traumatic brain injury, or for short, TBI. Now, this brings me to Phineas Gage, who many of you may be familiar with if you've taken a college psych course or if you've ever watched an episode of Ripley's Believe It or Not. Phineas Gage was a 25-year-old railroad worker in 1845, and he was blowing up rocks to clear the way for a new rail line in Cavendish, Vermont. Phineas would drill a hole in a rock, place an explosive charge, and then pack in sand using a 13-pound or 5.9 kilogram metal bar known as a tamping iron. I've seen pictures of this thing, and it looks menacing. The diameter was at least 7 inches and 4 feet or about 1.2 meters in length. If you were strong enough, you could use this thing as a spear and kill large game with it. It's no joke. So keep that image in the front of your mind as we move forward. Unfortunately for Phineas, the metal bar created a spark that ignited the charge he set, causing the tamping iron to take flight, entering through his left cheek, progressing to behind his left orbital socket, and then exiting out of the skull on the ipsilateral side, or the same side that it entered. Now, I've seen some pretty gruesome scenes after the fact of an incident, and I've been inside just about every part of the human body, so I'm hard to faze. But when I imagine watching that scene, hearing that blast, hearing the sound the skull made as the iron spike erupted from his head, in addition to seeing his eyeball hanging out of its socket, and this guy still being conscious and talking, it makes me giggle nervously and want to take a nap. I'm pretty sure workers' comp and OSHA weren't around in 1845, so Phineas was pretty much on his own here. Poor Phineas and anybody who watched that happen. And yes, my dear, sweet, traumatized listener, Phineas survived a railroad missile to the head, but not unscathed. John Martin Harlow was the physician who treated Gage after the accident, and he described Gage as being fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest of profanity, which was not previously his custom. If you talk about hardcore neurology and the relationship between structural damage to the brain and particular changes in behavior, Phineas Gage is patient 0. He was an ideal case because only one region of the brain, the frontal cortex, was damaged by the metal spike, resulting in stunning personality changes. So in essence, it took an explosion, 13 pounds of iron, 1 human head, and indulging in the grossest of profanity to usher in the modern era of neuroscience and begin the study of executive dysfunction. Executive dysfunction isn't an official diagnosis, by the way, but rather it's a set of symptoms associated with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or commonly known as ADHD. It is believed that ADHD is due to imbalances of neurotransmitters, and you've probably heard of one of these transmitters. It's called dopamine. And also ADHD can be contributed to structural changes in the brain. It's important to mention that anyone can experience EDF throughout their lives for a myriad of reasons. And it's especially challenging for those that are suffering from autism, dementia, TBI like Phineas, and ADHD. Executive functions develop over time and don't fully mature until the late 20s, late teens or early 20s. And since the frontal lobe is affected in people with ADHD, it can take 3 to 5 years longer than the average person for their executive functions to fully develop. Executive dysfunction can be inherited, with studies showing a hereditary rate of 20 to 40%. So 1 in 4 people with ADHD do have a parent who also has ADHD, and the other 75% are likely to have a close relative with ADHD. Although executive dysfunction in people with ADHD is usually something that's inherited or developed as your frontal lobe matures, there are some helpful ways to manage symptoms and wonderful people who specialize in assisting those with these challenges. And today's guest just happens to be one of those amazing people. But first, a brief word from our sponsor. This episode of Positively Ridiculous Podcast is brought to you by PG Hard Hats and Working Man Accessories. When the sky starts to fall, a Gauge hard hat for all. Because Phineas knows the last thing you want is another hole in your head. PG Hard Hats. So today I'm joined by coach, author, and speaker Sherri Fisher, who is the founder and CEO of Learn and Flourish, where she helps unleash the true potential of bright people of all ages, but especially those who have learning, attention, and executive function challenge. So, Sherri Fisher, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Oh, I'm excited to have you because I did hear from a little birdie that your favorite place to talk is on a podcast. So lucky us. So tell me why. Tell me why you like to talk on podcasts.
I guess I would say the first thing is that it's informal, and instead of being sort of like standing on a stage and talking from your script that you've memorized in your head, it's a chance to really dialogue about things and to get into some of the nitty gritty, and that's a great thing about a podcast.
Well, so you're speaking my language. I love the authenticity of an unscripted podcast. I love nitty and gritty, and I just like to make sure that we're hitting it with authenticity and a good time. So glad that you're here to join us to celebrate what it is that you do and what you bring to the world as an everyday hero, helping people with executive function challenges. So, why don't you tell us about Learn and Flourish? Tell us about what you do, who it is you help, and how you do that.
Okay, so that was a bunch of questions. So I might have to ask you to review them. But the first one was tell about Learn and Flourish. So Learn and Flourish is my private practice where I work with people who have what I call the trifecta, or some part of them, learning, attention, and executive function challenges. And the cool thing about it is that while under that particular name, Learn and Flourish, that's probably been, I don't know, going on 20 years. But I've been doing this work for closer to about 40 years. And the exciting part of having such a long tenure of working with people with these challenges is to see how many different ways we now have for helping people, and how positive psychology, which both of you, you and I have the training and background for that, how positive psychology really changed the way I look at what it means to have a disability, a problem. But instead of that is to look at that more in terms of what's working for you and how can we make that work even better.
Okay. So, yeah, you and I both went to the University of Pennsylvania and did the Master's of Applied Positive Psychology. And you are actually, like you said, you have been in this practice for 40 years. You were at UPenn, I think. What class were you a part of?
The first class.
Yeah, you were groundbreaking. You were part of that Marty Seligman groundbreaking class that really have forged the way for the rest of us to be able to take part in this science of well-being. So thank you for that. And then me, I'm class 18 at the 18th iteration. So we've come a long way, and so is the science. And so have people like you help to bring this more to the forefront and really push positive psychology into mainstream instead of making it just kind of like a niche practice. So, yeah, we thank you, forerunners and groundbreakers, for that. So, you told us what Learn and Flourish is. You didn't tell me why. Why did you get involved with helping people with executive function challenges? How did you, Sherri Fisher, find your passion for this?
Oh, it's actually a bunch of accidents. I didn't set out to do this. I would have done many other things, but I was a person without means, but with lots of scrappiness and creativity. So always took on private clients, no matter what it was I was doing. And I discovered that those private clients, after a while, they all kind of had some similar challenges, and I was able to be very effective with them. And it took a long time. I would say it probably took half of those 40 years before I just said, maybe even less than that, maybe 25 years I've been doing this as my solo work. And I think I did it because it's so exciting to be in the moment with somebody when they get that aha that lets them see themselves in new ways, and not as a victim of all the things that are wrong with them, but instead as a very whole and I don't know, a whole and capable person who is able to take the way they are and use that in brand new ways to be excited about living and doing things.
So you really do try to focus on strengths. You focus on strengths and not deficit, and you go from there. Because, like you said, you focus on what is working for the client or for the person, and then you build from there. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that that makes it sound as if it's maybe a simple way of doing things. It's actually kind of complicated by the fact that almost anybody who has been struggling for a long time is already attached to a deficit of way of thinking about themselves. Otherwise, you don't really reach out for help for something if you don't feel like there's something that needs, attention. That there's not something wrong. But what I find is that people who struggle, sometimes you have to get through some of the struggle bus part first. If you're on the struggle bus, you're on the struggle bus, and helping people feel that we all struggle. It's not just that they struggle because they have all these diagnoses. We struggle just by being part of life. And when you normalize some of the challenges, it is really very relaxing for somebody. That it's sort of sometimes the first time someone's ever said to someone that that's normal.
Right. So I find that really interesting because in your practice, whenever you're working, so you work with clients of all ages, correct? So that means children, adults, and then maybe even geriatric.
Most of the people I see, I would say, are going to be under 65. I don't tend to work with people who are much older. I do have a therapy dog. He and I go and we work in dementia care. So yes, I am working, except for that, that's volunteer. That's not the same thing.
Well, you and I share a passion for that. So you have your little therapy dog, and I have my little therapy dog, Dagny Joy, who I too take to the nursing home and help with the same kind of patient population. But what is your dog's name?
Henry, and he's actually not little at all. He's a 80-pound golden retriever.
Yep, I was.
He's a big boy.
Dagny's only about, well, she's gotten fat, and that's because she's been getting food from the table because she is loved and spoiled very much by my aunt and uncle. So she was once like a slim 24, 26 pounds, but now she's pushing 30. So we're gonna have to like put an intervention in there, like, break down the milk bones, put them in half, and hopefully, get her outside more. So, but yeah, thank you for doing that. Thank you for being part of dementia care and understanding how important it is for people to connect with animals, and especially whenever they're in facilities, because a lot of people, they had animals at home, but they don't get to see them anymore. And
Mhm.
it breaks their heart because you, I'm sure, are aware that whenever you walk in with Henry, like their faces light up. And dogs just have a special way of knowing what people need. And so like for Dagny, for instance, she'll just gently go and lay her head on somebody's knee, and they'll just start to pet her, and then she'll gently paw, and she'll just put her little paws on their lap. And then, and so she's just miraculous in that way. And I think it takes special animals like Henry and Dagny to do that. But I think that all animals are capable of making us better people, and in bringing a whole new dynamic to our lives that we never thought we could have, and that we never thought could make our life so good. So yeah, we share that. Okay,
Yes.
thanks. All right, now went on my diatribe, went on my little soapbox about why everybody should love animals. Okay, so let's talk about this. I was going to ask you the question that if you could conduct a social experiment, what would it be and why? And your answer to me, first of all, on the questionnaire, I only ask, so there's, probably maybe 12 questions on the questionnaire. I only ask you guys to fill out 7, and you're already over. And you're like, well, I'm an overachiever, so I'm answering this one too, which I love. Yeah, go get it, girl. It says, I conduct social experiments every day for work as a coach. So tell me about that. Whenever you say that you conduct your social experiment, tell me how you walk through with a client whenever you're working with them.
Well, I would say it's a social experiment because you don't, an experiment means you have a hypothesis. When you coach, you're only supposed to have so much of a hypothesis. You're really just supposed to be asking questions that reveal things. But when you work with a population where they come to you with a diagnosis or many diagnoses and years of either having no idea what's wrong, maybe getting a diagnosis as an adult, or they've had the diagnosis forever, but they have been told to just try harder. Whenever you have those things, the person who you're working with becomes a social experiment, and they have to be able to go out and kind of do their own research, and then they bring their research back to you. So that research is in the taking action in new ways. And then those actions are sometimes they're unique to a setting, a context that somebody's in. Maybe they're unique to creating the structure that somebody needs in order to be able to not become overwhelmed by all the tasks they have in their life. So I have what I call the SPCA. So S is for structure, P is for process and planning, C is for context, and A is for taking action. And so that's good because it goes with the dog analogy too. But that is a part of what the social experiment is with anybody who I work with, although the actual details of that could vary widely from person to person. So if we make it your life more structured in some particular way, if we come up with a process that works for you and a set of plans, maybe if-then plans that use implementation intentions or mental contrasting, if we customize it to a context instead of just tell you to try harder where it's not working, and if you learn how to take small actions and make small changes that help you to feel energized, you are more likely to continue to do the things that will help you be more successful. That's how to be me in a nutshell.
Okay, all right. Now we know how to do your job, Sherri. Now we all know how to do your job. We're going to put you out of business. Gotcha. I want to mention this article that I found because I found it a bit fascinating. It was in National Geographic, and the title of the article is "Women Are Being Diagnosed with ADHD at Unbelievable Rates." And here's why. Women and girls with attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder have historically been under and misdiagnosed. So it's asking, so is the world finally catching up? Do you see more female clients coming to you now for help when correcting the executive, I guess, dysfunction, or um, how would how do you describe that now? Neuroatypical or atypical neuro? I'm not really sure what the verbiage is.
The disability, a person who's autistic says that they're autistic. A person who has ADHD says, I have ADHD. So what we call these things is a little bit different from place to place, but what I would say is similar, especially if you're looking at females, is that it used to be easier to be what sort of socially hidden when you if you're female and had whatever your challenge was. One thing was that there were lower expectations. If you were a nice girl, you could be helped along. In my practice anyway, I do see, not, I don't know that I see more females, but I see more female students and young people, especially sort of 20 somethings shading into 30, like post university. Those clients, they tend to be overwhelmed by a lot of things. So it's always a little bit challenging. And this is why, if you are seeking diagnoses, that you go to a professional person who does this. It's always a little challenging to decide what's driving the bus. Are you actually struggling with sort of chronic low-level anxiety that makes it hard for you to pay attention? Are you struggling with anxiety because it's hard for you to pay attention? do you have a processing lag that makes you feel like you're always trying to be drinking information from a fire hose and you never quite process all of it? And that makes you always a little bit off track. Like there could be a lot of different features. And that's why when I work with a client, if they come to me with a diagnosis, that may not be that helpful.
That's actually very interesting that you say that. So, in this article, one particular subject is this 22-year old young lady, and that she was convinced that she had dementia. Now, as a medical professional, I know things. Me as a medical professional see this all the time. And because people will have a certain set of symptoms and they'll go to Dr. Google, they'll put in their symptoms, and then they get a selection. They get this menu of things that it could or could not be without basically the art of science, the art of medicine coming into it, where there's a lot of caveats to this stuff. So yeah, she's 22 years old. And so she went to Google and they told her that she had dementia. And one of the reasons that that happened is because some of her symptoms that she found significant in her life were like she forgot things like birthdays, she was missing meetings at work, she was struggling to even manage credit card debt. And the Google search had suggested that she had early onset dementia. And she went to a doctor who quickly dismissed that. So yay, go medical community. But it would still take her another 4 years and multitude of assessments from two psychiatrists before she eventually was diagnosed with ADHD. And once she was diagnosed, suddenly her life was changed. Everything started to make sense. Her constant fidgeting as a child, the caffeine fueled all-nighters just to finish school assignments that she could have finished weeks ago, but her procrastination was so bad that now all of a sudden she's like, I have a reason that this was so difficult. It wasn't because I was being lazy. It's because I literally have a diagnosis that keeps me from being the person that I want to be. And I think that that is hugely freeing. It's freeing in a way that once you're diagnosed with something, you can then categorize it, which sometimes gives us comfort as humans because we like to have organization in our lives. But then at the same time, it's also like, well, crap. Now I have an executive functioning challenge or I have ADHD. So now that means that I'm going to have to take medication. I'm constantly going to have to be, monitoring myself. And now I'm sick. That's sometimes how people take it whenever they get a diagnosis. They start to focus on all of the things that that diagnosis has taken away from them
Mhm.
and all the pain that it's caused them. Yeah, even so those eureka moments can still yet not be the best day of your life.
Right. So I wrote down while you were talking about a couple things. One is that by the time a person is an adult and gets a diagnosis, finally after lots of struggle, that person may have sort of low level depression, or they probably have self-esteem challenges. They have a lot of different things. And sometimes we think that those
Mhm.
are best addressed through therapy. And sometimes therapy is helpful. But what people often need is a super action-packed way of getting themselves out of their own way. And coaching can be a more direct way of doing that by using indirect means that empower the person to go ahead and take action. So I wrote down also like, what's in it for me? Um, I think that works on two different planes. So what's in it for me if I don't get help? There's always like secondary gain in psychological diagnosis. A person who, especially if they sort of really align with their diagnosis, they don't want to give up the things that it confers on them. Sometimes people give them extra things and they really want those extra things. Um, Also, at the same time, they may wish they didn't need to have those extra things, and there's a little bit of rub there. But trying to get from what's in it for me now, before I learn how to become the better version of myself versus what's going to be in it for me in the future when I'm doing something different that I don't even know about yet.
So what are some of those extra things that you were alluding to?
Okay. Well, so secondary gain that you get if you struggle, say that you lived in a family, there were multiple siblings, and it's parents tend to have the heuristic of that's my such and such a child. That's my super smart child. That's my athletic child. That's my disorganized child. And it kind of makes it easier for the parent, but they've sort of put the person into a little box that maybe makes the person feel like they're stuck there. So when they get to be an adult, they know they might still have the voice, that they hear, the very, very well-meaning parent voice that just wants to make sure that they grow up and turn into something, and that the parent feels like they're doing a good job as a parent. But what's in it for the adult child is now they may feel that their connection to their family is kind of based on this identity that's been conferred on them, and that they've been living that identity for a long time. Now, as they go out into the world and they need to transition into becoming more independent, there is a challenge there. So some of that again is addressed through therapy, family systems, looks, and all kinds of stuff. But coaching can help that person to be a lot more comfortable in the skin they're in right now, and to take small steps forward, because they get that they're making their own aha moments, sort of like as you work through them with them in a coaching session. So I often see people who are in therapy at the same time as they have a coach.
Thank you for that information, because that information to me is so important. And also we need to kind of like put this out there. Like ADHD is always kind of been like the boy disorder. And until like much recently, and I would say probably until 1999, there was a clinical psychologist, and her name was Kathleen Nadeau, and she had co-authored Understanding Girls with ADHD, and it came out in 1999. And it was one of the first real attempts to characterize how ADHD appeared in young girls. And the research community still thought ADHD was almost exclusively a boy disorder. And she recounts how they were laughed at during conferences. And now she's recognized as an authority on women with ADHD. Parents would say things like, we've got these guys that are in the principal's office 3 times a week getting suspended and throwing spitballs. And you've got these quiet girls making honor roll, making, these fantastic grades. And you don't think that they have ADHD, but they do. And just because they're high performers, and again, their behavior isn't what we see as it's atypical than what we see in males, that doesn't mean that they still aren't struggling with the same kind of issues, and with a lot less support, because they're not seen as having, like you said, societally. There's always has been an expectation about kind of like how women and how girls act as children, and they act as women. And so for someone who's, forgetful or a little or flighty, or shakes their legs whenever they're sitting, or is fidgeting with something, well, that's just normal, for a woman to do. And so that's how these women have been undiagnosed for so many years. But yet, even being undiagnosed, they've still been high achievers. So that just goes to show you how much harder they're working, and how much more adaptable and scrappy these women have had to be in order to reach these levels of success.
The other thing I see, so I'm going to say yes to all of that. The other thing I see in young women, especially young women who are sort of I don't know, they're like they're coming up on 30, and 30 is starting to feel like a very big scary number to them, because they've sort of survived, but they definitely haven't been thriving. They've survived, but they still have not been pleasing to other people. So they're very much still wanting to be the child that their parent didn't see. Like they compare themselves, or they're in their mind, they're competing with a sibling, or they're competing with their parent. Gee, they look at their mother and they say, oh, my mother did this and this and this, and I'm only. So there's a lot of I'm only thinking that goes with that. But you were talking about fidgeting. lack of self-regulation is, that's a key feature of having ADHD. But when girls have this, they're better able to self-regulate for a while. If they have these other behaviors, I've just started working with. I have a very lovely young occupational therapist who I have been working with, because she has all kinds of tips and tricks and tools for how to help somebody become more self-regulated, not just to send them to a yoga class or teach them how to meditate, but all kinds of brain-based ways to self-comfort that keep you on track. A little thing to do. One of the little things that she does is she has when she works with girls. So I say girls, but like young women, and out post college, she has them make their own fidgets. These are wearable fidgets, beautiful bracelets, beautiful earrings.
Yeah.
A barrette or something you stick in your hair, or something that you would a pin that you would put on on a jacket, or just small things. And those small things help to have you be more centered, and they're calming. So instead of sitting in a chair with a rubber band and kicking your legs against it, you can do smaller things all day long. So the number of things that girls and women might have been doing all along that were helpful, turning those into like little mini interventions that are fun and energizing and focusing. There are so many ways to help. So that is on the plus side. On the challenge side is that by the time you get help, you could really have been beating yourself up for a long time with the aid of social media, just showing all the ways that you are not good enough.
I was gonna bring that up actually, but let's go back to the fidgeting.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so one of the undiagnosed symptoms is excessive hair twirling,
Mhm.
and I don't know how many girls I knew whenever I was younger that were just all the time in their hair, all the time in their hair. And just thinking about that, I have always associated hair twirling to be a feminine thing. I never associated that I never associated excessive hair twirling to possibly be a symptom of, ADHD or executive function challenges. Never in a million years did I even think about that. Because again, for me, I think even as a woman, I was kind of falling into that societal bias.
Listening to you talk about hair, excessive was the word I was kind of like glomming onto. What makes something excessive? Is it somebody thinks it's excessive? What happens if it's perfectly fine? So ADHD is what's called a differential diagnosis. There's no blood test for it. And you could take the same person and have two different clinicians see them and get a diagnosis and not get a diagnosis. I see this with kids who I kind of call them all kids. I guess this is a sign of me not being their age anymore. Um, I see people who have not been diagnosed with something for a long time, and all of a sudden they are. So whether we're talking about ADHD or some other related learning thing, some of these things are pretty easy to nail down, and some of them are not. And then we also don't know what's driving the bus to come up to a certain set of symptoms. So if you're working from symptoms backwards and trying to figure out, do these symptoms equal a diagnosis? Sometimes different people are going to see different things.
So reverse engineering to a diagnosis.
Well, that's kind of how it works. You have differential diagnoses like this. Are there enough symptoms that we can call it such and such? But then you talked before about medication. So some people will be benefited by medication because it's
Yeah.
going to increase focus, for example, but other people will not be benefited by that. Does that mean that they don't have a certain thing? So sometimes I get people who are referred to me who have no diagnoses when it's pretty clear that they're struggling with the things that a diagnosed person struggles with. So the sometimes the question is a diagnosis helpful? And if so, how is it helpful? And then this is a big question. Who do I disclose the diagnosis to? We live in a world where everybody seems to think it's okay to disclose all kinds of personal things about themselves on the internet. And how many celebrities tell you their story because they think it's going to help somebody or other else? but in real life, you don't necessarily want to disclose. But you might have whatever your experience of having your disability diagnosis is. You might find that your experience means that you really would benefit from accommodations. But we don't offer accommodations to people because they ask for them. We don't trust people that they're asking for something. Instead, we somehow have to like have a line in the sand that says, you need to have such and such. If you're on this side of the line, we don't do that. If you're on this other side of the line, yep, we can do it for you. Then you get lawyers involved and all kinds of other things that get more complicated. So back to
Yeah.
the hair twirling. What if hair twirling is just okay?
Okay. So, well, and also I'd like to bring up that a lot of women with ADHD from childhood, girls and women, they're more likely to have their symptoms mistaken for emotional or learning difficulties. And so they're less likely to be referred for assessments.
They might send them to a therapist. Nowadays, I would say I see this more in like in high school girls. A mother will contact me and she'll say, and we already have put, so and so into therapy. So they see a mental health challenge that they want to address, but what they may be missing is that they got to the mental health challenge because there's other stuff going on that is driving the bus.
Well, so there was like we are discussing, is gender bias also does play a role in this diagnosis. We've touched on that. And so I also found two studies. There were two studies where teachers were presented with vignettes of children with ADHD. When the child's names and pronouns were changed from female to male, the teachers were more likely to recommend treatment and offer extra support. So, that's pretty significant. That's basically saying, okay, so with blinders on, if you saw these symptoms, if you saw this occurring in your classroom, what would you do for this student? And for boys, it's like, oh, well, gosh, they need help because, it seems like that, they probably have ADHD, and ADHD can really affect your learning and kind of really affect you as an adult and your emotional well-being. But then you tell them, well, it's actually a female student. What do they do then? Does that actually cause them to reevaluate how they see their female students in the classroom, how they are assessing the severity of these symptoms?
Maybe. This is fascinating though, because so I take little notes when I do podcasts with people, and this is like we're really getting into some like really I don't know, like difficult areas where there's tons of nuance, and I live in there. So I love that.
Well, welcome to Positively Ridiculous Podcast, Sherri,
Thank
where we basically bring you down into the dirt.
Okay, well, that's good. This is where we're gonna go. The nuance is good. So I'm wondering, like any kind of social science research, you always have to wonder whether people are bringing like so much of themselves into something that you're getting a biased and therefore not what we really are reading. Plus, we read it ourselves and we bring our own biases to things. But
Yes.
what happens if that teacher who looks at the vignette about the male pronoun child, and then they look at it with the female pronoun child? What if what they're really thinking in their head is, oh, I can work with her? That's a really different thing than reading about the boy and maybe imagining, oh, I've had those kids in my class. Boy, that's so disruptive. That kid needs help. Whereas they might think, oh, I've had that girl in my class. I'm on it. I've got that. That is a different conclusion that they're making, and for different reasons. So their biases are maybe more about their experience of working in their classroom. So teaching is a really hard job for that reason.
Yeah.
You can only leave yourself out of it so much, and you have a job to do, and you have a year to get the job done. And there's a big wide range of where kids are sort of available for learning. And some of the challenges that kids face are about their home life or about their community life or about learning and executive function and ADHD. It could be so many different things, physical things, so many, many, many things. And if a teacher feels that they can work with whatever that thing is, or they have resources within their school, so somebody else. So we also have in some schools, especially in elementary schools, you have layers of sort of specialist teachers, because kids are treated as developmental in their challenges, as opposed to once you start moving up in different grade levels, it's less about your developmental place, like where you are, and more like who you are. So when you get to high school or to college, it's a lot easier to dismiss somebody. So I wonder, how old is, in that particular study, how old are the kids that they're
It
getting?
doesn't disclose that to me. So this,
Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
Well, so this was a summation of the two studies. So I wasn't I can go, you know what? I can always go into the cited references for this from this article, and I can find those two studies. And I can send those to you. We can both kind of like look at those. But yeah, the age of those kids, it would be very interesting, because are you saying that there would be a difference from elementary school to high school?
Yes, totally. Because the teacher who's trained to work with kids developmentally, also, what level of experience do the teachers have? Is this a teacher who's been doing it for 20 years and has kind of done it all and seen it all? They're going to be like, boom, right there. They're going to make their decision about for themselves as an educator, what needs to happen so that all of my kids are cared for. Because that's something that the teacher cares about. The teacher in a classroom setting cares about individual kids, but they also have like a group of people who
Yeah.
they need to move along to the end of the school year. So I think that that's fascinating, and I might be poking a lot of holes in the
I think that
methodology of the
who
study, but
cares
I
if
don't
we
know.
poke holes? Honey, rip the bag if you need to, because this is the kind of stuff that needs to be discussed. And I think that it's really great that we're able to take an article in National Geographic, so obviously widely published and, widely read, and be able to say, yeah, okay, now this is all very interesting information. However, and having an expert like you, whenever we
Mhm.
can talk about this, and you bring up these caveats and you bring up these nuances and you bring up these important questions, it makes us better. It makes us more critically thinking. It makes us more capable of maybe decisions for ourselves, and also for people that have kids that may read this article. So I think that I love having your expertise on this, and I'm just fortunate that I found this article and you agreed to come on the show. I mean, you're making my life beautiful, Sherri Fisher. I love it.
Oh, I was going to say, a thing that we haven't talked about that's related to this, though, is the whole executive function situation.
All
So
right.
executive functions, there's 8 of them. They go by different names. Some people say there's 7, some people say they're 9, but there's like, I don't know, I say there's 8. And being able to manage your attention is one of the executive functions. So if you're looking at how your brain processes information, how you are able to be more focused, maybe you're less focused, that there are lots of things going on. And the first 3 of those I call stop, switch, and start. And that you have to be able to stop doing whatever you're doing right now. If you're really into something, say you're like totally in your flow state and you're just like working on all the right cylinders, and your job is to stop doing that and switch gears and do something else, that can look like you just, you can't stop yourself. You're perseverating would be like the fancy term for that. But maybe you're not really perseverating. Maybe you're in the flow state, but we don't look at that. So
And so let's just go back and say, whenever we talk about flow state, what we mean is this is a concept that was introduced by Csikszentmihalyi, and flow state basically just says whenever you're doing a particular thing and you are engrossed and you feel you're most mentally stimulated, you lose track of time, and during this activity, you have a sense of tranquility, you're in flow. That's really what a flow state is for people out there that aren't familiar with some of our positive psychology terms.
and so yes, and if you say you are a a young adult and you have been given lots of tasks to do that don't have a lot of structure, and you find yourself really, in the flow state for one of those tasks that you're doing, and you don't get to the other ones, you could look like you are a slacker to the boss, to your coworkers, um, because the next thing you need to do is you need to be able to switch. You need to stop doing the thing. Be aware that you're doing the thing, stop doing the thing, switch to whatever the next thing is. It's the next most useful, sequential, however it is, it's that you need to be able to do that, having planned in advance. Switch. And then sometimes there are lots of switches. We are constantly switching back and forth. I'm sure that you can think of times when you're trying to read something online and you have a book and you're trying to type up things and you want to take notes. It's just too many things going on. Your brain is
That's what I'm doing
switching.
like right now. I have a book open, I have a screen open. Oh, and by the way, I'm doing a podcast.
Right. Many, many things simultaneously. And then there's start. So we like to think of, and you'll see this in procrastination research, that you should just get started. But just getting started requires you to stop whatever you're doing right now and switch, make the brain switch into whatever it is you need to do. And if you don't have the right amount of structure and the right amount of sort of forward planfulness, you're not going to be able to do that. And you also have to be able to integrate information that you remember that happened in the past in a way that doesn't make you feel bad about whatever that information was. So if you got feedback that you needed to do something in a different way, and you haven't sort of integrated that and made it be a positive, useful, helpful thing, you might find that you are completely overwhelmed and you never even get to start. And all you did was stop, try to switch, boom. Then whether you're inattentive or whatever, you're going to look like you don't pay attention. There could be, in other words, lots of different places where the holes are. But we treat executive functions especially in education settings, as organizational challenges.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well,
Okay.
if you lose something or you don't put something away, chances are you're stuck in somewhere in that switch process. And the switch didn't fully go through. But once you learn that switching is a thing, then you can start learning when you are getting the cue that you need to make a switch so that you follow through with it. And then you can check to see that it was completed. But if you don't even know that that's a thing, you never do
So
it.
give me an example of a cue. What is a cue that would let me know that it's time to switch?
It might be easier if you gave me a time when it was challenging for you, because what happens is that you can have the cues are often either positive, I'm feeling energized and so I'm going to continue with this, or the cue could be something that makes you feel it sort of like dredges up something. It's not going to be cognitive. It's going to probably be somewhere in your body. You're going to notice that you have like the little twinge that makes you feel a little bit anxious. And if you just sort of discount it or you reach for like another Snickers bar or whatever, you're not going to be really paying attention to what that cue is. But learning that when you get that little something or other, that it's a little reminder that you are feeling that little bit of anxiousness is not something to ignore. It's for you to notice it, let that wave go through, and then continue on with your switch.
I think that probably an example that I can give, an anecdote that I can give is so I can be at work, and depending if I'm in the clinic or I'm in the hospital or I'm in the operating room. Operating room is a little bit different because your attention, obviously, that's where I'm in flow, is in the operating room. So, it's engrossing. And I can't really switch my attention to a lot of things, obviously. But I would say probably whenever I'm in clinic, that's probably one of the hardest things for me to be able to stay focused especially whenever you have calls coming in from the hospital, whenever you're trying to manage both places. And so a lot of the times, because I'm so acute care focused, meaning in the hospital focused, it's hard for me to tear away from what's going on in the hospital to really be able to give my full attention and passion to the clinic, right? Because I'm more engrossed with what's happening over here in the hospital. It's just kind of more acute. It's not any more important, but to me, it's just more interesting. And then whenever I go back over into the clinic, it's more for kind of like more of a everyday milieu, very standard kind of cookie cutter. And it's a hard time. I have a hard time switching back and forth, especially if I'm covering in the same day. That's really hard for me to do. And I can notice that before I go to clinic, I definitely want to get a snack, some water, um, I don't know, drag my feet. Now, I just want to
Mhm.
let the listeners know, this does not mean that this is what your healthcare provider is doing, and that's why your appointments are always behind. That's not true. That's not true. Don't think that this happens there. We like being punctual because we like to be able to get in and get you out whenever you expect, because we like our patients to be happy and healthy. But sometimes it takes a lot of work.
Okay, so I can give you some insights about that too. Um, you talked about things being interesting, and sometimes people are kind of wired for problem solving. So when you're not solving a problem that has intricate parts to it, your brain calms down. So there's a level of stimulation that you are attracted to. So it's kind of like your dopamine rush,
Mm.
right? You are actually waiting for the next thing to be able to solve. That anticipation is going to give you your a little of your dopamine, and you're now in a situation where you're seeking problems to solve, but in the clinic setting where it's more it's more easily expected, like like the expectations are not going to be something different all the time, and also the perceived stakes for the clinician are a lot lower. This happens everywhere, not just in medicine, so no one needs to worry that this is just a doctor patient kind of problem. It happens a lot. So some people are using the medical analogy. Some people are sort of like born to be GPs. They're going to see the same 10 kinds of problems. Maybe they become internists. They're going to still see the same 10 kinds of problems most of the time. And they like that. They don't feel the need to do like, edgy kinds of things. So I have a relative who used to ride in the medevac helicopter, went from
Yeah.
dispatch.
I used to do that
Oh,
too. Yeah.
yeah. Well, he went from being a dispatcher while he was uh, applying to med school. And then when he was in med school, I guess he also rode in the helicopter. So he was a self-declared trauma junkie. So what does it mean to be a trauma junkie? Well, that's the person who's like anticipating that they're already getting the rush of, I'm going to be able to go in here, I'm going to be able to solve problems. There's going to be something big. Only I can do this, right? Or only our team can do this, right? And if you need that level of stimulation, we need people in the world to do things like that. That person can look incredibly bored, disengaged, inattentive if you put them in a situation where they're not getting that, because that's what they need. Their brain wants that. It's an attraction. So what about problem solving? So if you are a person who finds that school is very boring, and you've been bored in school from when you were very small, and now you go into the world of work and you find it initially work is interesting, but now it's boring. We have so many ways of labeling that. Lazy, ungrateful. You have a job.
Flighty.
What do
And
you mean? Flighty? What, right. We have lots of ways of labeling those things that don't really look at what the person would need. And you can give yourself a lot of what you need once you know what that is,
mm,
instead of just taking on all the different labels for all the things that are wrong with you.
nice.
That was a
Well,
lot of talk, but I wanted to address what you were just talking about, because I like that's a thing.
yeah. Well, fix me, Sherri. What do I do? Fix me. Help me.
Well, how many people who have your other professional work life also have a podcast? And we're going on to a really intensive master's program that's like not just any master's program. Like, think of all the things that you do. Like, where is all the energy coming from?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
coming from not people could say, oh, she's so smart. Well, not to discount your intelligence, because clearly you're very bright, but lots of very, very bright people are not necessarily attracted to, adding more and more stimulation into their lives.
Yeah.
So if you're constantly seeking input, that input might or might not be about having attention challenges. It could just be like that's your stimulation style.
Yeah, and I think that that's exactly where we are. Is that I've learned that about myself, especially after I learned um, my character strengths. And
Zest.
well, so zest wasn't that high actually. So my top five, if you don't mind me sharing, Sherry, my top five were honesty, bravery, judgment, love, and an appreciation of excellence and beauty. And so I you would think that love of learning would be higher in there. You would think that leadership would even be higher in there, but those are my five jams. Is the honesty, the bravery, the judgment, the love, and the appreciation of excellence and beauty. And whenever I got those results, I was like, yeah, that I believe that that's truly who I am on the inside. Because I think a lot of people, whenever they take the VIA and they get those results back, and it's not what they expected them to be, they can feel a little disappointed and even disconnected from the survey itself. Whenever they either were answering honestly on the survey, but maybe just had a misconception of who they were, or they were trying to answer questions that made them that made kind of like the survey into the person that they think that they are. I just kind of went in there very honestly, top character strength. Just went in there kind of like, I really want to know. I really want to know. And that's what came out. And I was like, yeah, I feel that that's authentic. I feel that this is true. And I was very proud, actually. I was proud. And I look back over my life and I'm just like, oh, yeah, that was there. Oh, yeah, that was there. Oh, I could probably be a little bit better at that. Yeah, but it's there, but it's definitely there. So, but I do agree that I'm just someone who craves to know, who craves the authenticity, who craves asking tough questions of myself and of others to really get down to the essence of who we are and what it is we're really supposed to be doing with our lives. Because I do believe that everyone is born with a purpose, but sometimes we just need to find our cause. I'm finding my cause every time that I do a podcast and I'm able to have these kinds of conversations with people.
I love this. So I'm a real fan of strengths teams where you don't just look at like having a strength, but look at the person in a more holistic way. So if you have judgment and critical thinking, you're going to be the person who is wired to ask the why questions and to want to have data to back up your why. And if you are the honest person, you're going to want to share what you learn with other people. And if you're brave, you're going to go ahead and do it. So that's is why you're a podcast host. Okay. Um, and then if you have appreciation of beauty and excellence, you are going to defer to other people's excellent work. And you're also going to really make sure that your own work is always through either the extra care and attention that you put into your work for yourself that makes that beautiful and excellent. You might also be a little hard on yourself because that's sort of the perfectionist strength. I have that too. Creativity and appreciation of beauty. I put those two together. It's like how I run my life for lots of things, but I also am very grateful and I have love in the top five like you do, and also social intelligence, which is why I am always running my what was it you called it, my social experiments. I'm always running social experiments because that's like how my brain is wired.
Well, and it's really funny that you
Yeah.
bring up creativity because this was a very interesting answer that you put in your questionnaire. And because I asked, what is the most important personality trait or strength someone would need in your industry to be successful in your job? And you put creative presence. So talk to me about what is creative presence? What is that? What does that even mean, Sherry?
Well, while we've been going along here, I have been um listening to you, but not just like staring at you in the screen, and writing down things that you say, because I want to be able to respond to those things in a way that lets me give like a different spin on them. Because Critical thinking is not one of my top strengths. It might be in, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not even thinking about what's in the 6 through 10, but it's down a ways. I'm a very good critical thinker, but for different drivers than for you. And when I write down the things that like, all over here, like what's in it for me, gender bias, fidgets, executive functions, like all the different topics of things. But when I keep track of those things, I'm being very present with the conversation that we're having. And I'm also at the same time able to think creatively about what do those things mean? How might we address those? How can I answer her question in the way that she maybe A has never thought of before ever in her entire life, or B, she's just waiting to hear because this is what she's really asking me. So that's what I think creative presence is.
Well, you've got me nailed to the board, lady, with both your assessment of my character strengths, but then also just with what it is that I like to do. Because, whenever we ask questions, sure, we're either asking a question because we already know the answer, or we're asking the question because we want to go deeper, right? And you've done that for me today, and I just thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sherri. It has been an absolute honor to have to have you here with me today and to talk about these subjects. It's just great. I just love getting to know you. I love hearing your story. I love hearing about your passion. It's just been so good for me. So right now, I'm going to change it up a bit for us, and we're gonna play a game.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the title of this game is called Stump Sherri.
Okay. Well, that could be easy. I could lose in the first round.
So because whenever I asked you what's your top, what's your top board or card or word game to play, you told me that you like, some zero games the best because just as long as your mind is basically active and you're having a good time, then you're all for it. But you don't really care about who wins or loses. It's more about an experience, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good to know, Sherri. Good to know. All right, sweetheart. So let me get to my little
You didn't call
question.
me darling, though. You called me sweetheart.
I did. So yeah. Do you find that offensive?
No, I think it's funny because I'm from the north and you're not.
And there we go. Just bringing worlds together, sharing intimacies, taking for each other for who we are. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the game Stumping Sherri or Stump Sherri. Okay.
Okay.
Sherri Stumpers, whatever. I mean, we can go all
It
day.
alliterates, so it's interesting.
Okay. Yay. I know, right? Scout Sanders, Stumping Sherri. Let's do it. All right. So, what's something that always wants an answer but doesn't have a question?
The telephone.
Yes, correct.
Bing, bing, bing.
So I want to show you this. So this bell says, well, because of the blurred background, but it says ring for beer. Now, I just want you to know how ironic that it is that this bell is currently where it is. So I got this bell from my aunt and uncle's house, and my aunt and uncle combined have drank zero alcohol in their lives. And so whenever I found this bell there, I was just like, is there something that I don't know? Or was this a gag gift? What was it? So whenever I asked my aunt about it, she was just like, no, I had to have something like that was really loud so I could hear your uncle whenever he was upstairs and he wasn't feeling well. And so we had to get a cowbell so that I could hear him in the kitchen or downstairs. And I was like, okay, well, that was a good idea. And we also need you to address your hearing loss. But because this sucker
Oh.
is loud. Okay. So here we go. What happens when you throw a blue rock into the Red Sea?
Well, assuming it's not pumice, it sinks.
Yes, correct. Well, Sherri, you're a little harder to stump than what I thought. Okay. What's something that copies your looks but not your sounds?
It could be somebody else who's just trying to look like you.
This is something
None of
that we use every day
that copies your looks.
that copies your looks.
Mirror.
You should be doing these. You should be writing these, Sherri. Okay. I wave. I wave even if you don't say hello. What am I?
Flag.
Okay. What word becomes longer after you add 2 letters to it? What word becomes longer after you add 2 letters to it?
Long. I was teaching these kids how to tell jokes. They had to be able to remember how to tell the joke, like, like maybe in 3 parts, or riddles or things like that. But they had to be able to learn how to think in jokes.
Uh-huh.
So
How does
I didn't know you
how does
could
one
do
do
this.
that? How does one do that? I might be doing it now. I don't know, but tell me. You tell me. How does one do that?
Well, I'm just like, think about some jokes are found funny by some age levels and not by others. So like kids who are like between 2 and 4, those kids, um the second graders might have thought it was still funny to say, why is the chicken cross the road to get to the other side? The older kids didn't think stuff like that was funny, so they told different kinds of jokes, but they had to learn how to be a good audience, and they had to learn why somebody else might have thought something was funny. And also, what do you think someone's thinking when they think something is funny?
Mm-hmm.
That I think is the tricky bit is, we all know people. So you don't have humor in your top 5, but like,
Yeah, that kind of hurts.
boy, almost every high school, middle school too, high school, middle school boy, and sort of younger college boy, all that range, humor is like in their top 5 always. They think they're the funniest thing, right?
Oh yeah. I think as women, we've all had our fair share of fart jokes and heard about Dirty Sanchez.
How many times have you ever seen any adolescent really, but this is like very much a boy thing. They often have bravery and fairness and humor. So they're forever coming up with things that they think are very funny based on slights that they have imagined in the world. And it just got like, right out the mouth.
Well, this also helps to explain how dad jokes evolved and how they happened and how they're now so very pervasive in our society.
Yes, yes.
I have one more teaser for you, and then
Okay.
we'll stop. Okay. So, you ready for this one?
Yes.
How many times can you cut a cake in half? How many times can you cut a cake in half?
Oh, that's gonna have 1,000 answers.
Well, it's actually technically it's only one. Only one answer.
I, oh, one answer. Well, if we're thinking of just the cake itself, you can only cut it in half one time, because then by definition you will have,
Yeah.
but you can cut each one of those separate pieces into more pieces, and that, so it's the problem there is it depends on how you're defining
Well, that's what I
the
was gonna say.
cake.
It has to be the whole. Like I was getting ready to say, it has to be the one whole
Okay.
cake. And yeah, you could only cut that one
Yeah.
whole cake in half one time. Because then it would be
Yeah.
how many times can you cut the pieces of a half of a cake?
Right, but someone might not ask it that way or might not think that. So I think this way, like, whatever, creative presence. I think this way because you you say things to people all the time and they are not interpreting what it is you think you said. Not because you said the wrong thing and not because they are not smart. It's because we don't all process all the
Yeah.
same stuff. It's like whatever I was teasing you about being from the South. I don't talk slow enough to talk to even ever sound like I come from the South.
So, okay, so first of all, I am from the South, and however, I do not speak slowly, and I don't have a significant draw, nor do I have an issue with listening or even speaking quickly. So I think that that is a misconception, Miss Fisher. However, it's one that is common, but it's not one that should still remain prevalent. Because I do believe that whenever we make those kinds of differentiations between regions, between peoples, is that we're not maybe intentionally trying to insult them, but it still is insulting because you're saying, well, you're different and you're
Exactly.
different. Yeah. And your difference, since it's not the same as mine, makes you
Right.
less.
So,
Or
but
yeah.
so this is good because it brings us back to the idea of anytime we diagnose anything, where anytime we label anything, potentially we're missing a whole lot of bigger possibilities. So whether we're talking about, the trifecta of people who I work with, learning, attention, and executive function challenges, if we think we know what those things are, we are probably not looking at a much more nuanced version of the person from XYZ location, the person with this diagnosis. It's all the same thing. But notice how you got revved up. Imagine being
Mhm.
somebody who has a diagnosis, some scientifically trained person told them that they have a thing.
Yeah.
That happens to them
Because
every
stigma,
day.
yeah, well, it happens to me every time
They're
someone
hair
finds out
twirlers
I'm
or
from this.
whatever, however we label them.
Well, but this is the thing is that stigma, yes, that's why I say that we can't live within diagnosis. We can't define ourselves by diagnosis because the stigma that comes along with these diagnoses can definitely take a huge chunk of joy out of our life. And it can also cover our identity. It can actually cover the most important part of us, which isn't our diagnoses. It's what we contribute to society. It's what we contribute to individuals. And whenever you're saying, well, this person has A, B, C, or D, so they'll never be able to accomplish this. What you're telling them is you might think that you're trying to be kind by setting them up not for failure, but for reasonable expectations. But what you're not taking into account is how this person got as far as they have
Yes.
and how they got to this point. And so I'm a huge believer that regardless of what's happened to us in our past, regardless of how people want to characterize us for their comfort, we don't live within a diagnosis. We don't live within stigma. We live above that because we have to rise above it in order to be able to have a clear view of who we are and what it is we want for our future. And then we decide what we're capable of. That's how I see things. That's how I see things personally. Um, because I have experience with stigma and I have and I have experience with diagnoses. Yeah. So that's kind of how I've had to learn to live my life.
I think that is whenever you can ask yourself, what else is true? That's one of my favorite questions to ask a coaching client. What else is true? Because it's very easy to listen to the little voice that tells you something. And we're very attached to these little voices that tell us things because they connect us in some, not always healthy, but connect us oftentimes to other people. So when you're not listening to the little voice and you're doing your own thing, you might be rebelling. But you should notice if you're rebelling. And if you are doing something because it is reminding you that you can be better than the little voice, you need to notice that. So, for example, if someone told you you'd never amount to anything or you'd never, like all the never stories and stuff, you need to notice that that's like there are cues that remind you. If you find yourself like going, great guns to accomplish something and it's just burning you out, you might want to ask yourself why you're doing that. Maybe it's not because it's a burnout task. Maybe the way you approach it is because you're carrying not just so stigma is something that is sort of external to you that you take on, but sometimes it's what you've already been wearing on the inside that is the part that like no one, if you dress like that, no one will ever love you. If you and there we have
Yeah.
lots of those that we carry around with us well into adulthood that we were foisted upon us as children. you know we were talking earlier about being, all the like the female things, like so many that have been attached to
Yeah.
us.
Well, if you're too smart, too vocal, and too successful, then a man can never, a man's never going to find you attractive. And
Right.
I like to counter that. No, a weak man wouldn't. I think women, man, we get it hard. We get it hard.
We've made a lot a lot of, well, in my lifetime, there's been lots of growth and many successes. I'm working with some high school girls right now who are looking at the impact of civil rights legislation through the 60s and 70s, and how has that grown, and how were their lives affected by things that they didn't even know existed before they started researching them. So that we spend a lot of time looking, I think, at like the gloom and doom of how awful things are, and we stare down the pipeline of the future and we see bad things, but many good things that have happened can continue to happen. And working together toward that kind of a future is something that's very near and dear to me.
Well, amen to that. And I love the idea. I love what you just said, and I love the project that's being carried out currently, because I think that as an American, as a female, we definitely need to be aware, and we definitely need to be educated about how far we've come, how long it's taken us to get here, who were our forebears, who were our forerunners, and what is it going to take to maintain what we currently have, in addition to gain more ground. And I never want that kind of idea, passion, and that kind of recognition to be lost. Because I think that is whenever we start to lose ground and we start to see a lot of things go backwards. And that's one thing as a woman I never want to see happen. So, one more thing from your questionnaire, and this was, what would be the book's title? What would be the book's title about you if your worst enemy wrote it? And you put the title as, why not? No more life in the passive voice. So, and you said it's about the trials and tribulations of having to try things because they know you. So what does that mean? Because they know me.
Well, so creativity is one of my top strengths. So if it looks like something is just not going to happen, I my one of my favorite things to do is to say, what if we X? And so never living in the passive voice, never having things be done to you and not being able to say, why not? Let's try it. So that's what the book about me. It would be written by my worst enemy, though, because it can really drive other people crazy that I don't just say that something is fine if it's like bad. This is how I have my work, right? I have my work because I don't just go with the label and say, oh, you have such and such. Oh, well, here are the accommodations that exist on the books right now for people like you. Right?
Thank you for seeing us for more than our diagnoses, Sherri. Thank you for seeing past the external stigma, and thank you for being as knowledgeable as you are and using that knowledge to make people's lives better every day, because it's a passion, because it's a talent, and because it's needed. Thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you very much for saying so. My work is I don't know. It's a lot of fun. I think that it's the work that I do, not because I chose it. I feel like the work chose me,
I
and there's
love
something
that.
very
That's
nice
really
about that.
beautiful. That's definitely someone that has a
Mhm.
purpose who found their cause.
Yeah, there you go. Uh, I have a purpose and found my cause.
There you go. Congratulations. That's a pretty sweet place to be. All right.
Thank you.
So, this was coach, author, and speaker Sherri Fisher. And you need to go and check out her website, which is learnandflourish.com. And you can find out more information about what Sherri does, her support services, her specialties, and just kind of see the awesome things that she's able to do for you or someone that you love. And I just want to say thanks again, Sherri. And I hope that you and Henry have a great day. And I hope that Henry gets plenty of belly scratches.
Sounds good. He says yes. He's a fan.
there, you groupies for good. Please don't forget to like, follow, rate, and find us on all major streaming services and at positivelyridiculouspodcast.com and on Patreon, where you can find full-length episode videos, merchandise discount codes, and so much more. Just visit patreon.com/Positively Ridiculous Podcast. That's patreon.com/Positively Ridiculous Podcast. Well, that is season 2, episode 1 done and dusted. Thanks for riding shotgun with me as we delved into the world of executive dysfunction and ADHD with Sherri Fisher. Be sure to visit learnandflourish.com to find motivation, beat procrastination, discover a career, become a leader, and parent more effectively. While you're there, check out Sherri's book, The Effort Myth: How to Give Your Child the 3 Gifts of Motivation, and Unleash Your Epic Self, 35 Practices for Busting the Effort Myth. This is Scout Sanders and Dagny Joy, encouraging you to go out and live a positively ridiculous life. Talk soon. Positively Ridiculous Podcast is a Euthymic Ventures LLC production.